Hello and welcome to this week's podcast. This is Alan Mucerino, Superintendent of Schools for the Alvord Unified School District. And this week our special guest is the Commissioner of the CIF Southern Section, Mr. Rob Wigod. Rob, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Alan. I really appreciate being invited, and it's great to be with you.
Well, I know you're a busy man and you're basically on everybody's plate. Everybody wants a piece of you, I'm sure. So thank you for taking the time to join us. As you know, the governor came out and expressed his interest in getting our economy moving, reopening California, and of course, childcare and getting schools started is a big part of that. So let's go ahead and start things off by listening to the governor's comments during his 4/28 briefing.
That have been broadly defined around the need to address our kids in schools. We clearly have shut down, people well aware of this. The schools are shut down for the remainder of the school year. Learning continues at home, distance learning and the like. But we recognize there's been a learning loss because of this disruption. We're concerned about that learning loss even into the summer. And so we are considering the prospect of an even earlier school year into the fall, as early as late July, early August. And so we're beginning to socialize that. We have made no decisions definitively in that space, but I just want folks to know the concern around learning loss and the concern about waiting till later in the year into the fall for the new school year. As a parent myself, and having talked to many other parents and educators, even the kids, I think we might want to consider getting that school year moved up a little bit. And so that's one of the things that we want to begin to socialize in this indicator. We need to prepare for that. We need to start preparing for the physical changes in the schools and the environmental changes in the schools that are necessary in order to advance that conversation and make it more meaningful, accordingly in the child care space itself. We are able to make these, again, announcements and begin to have a more public conversation with you about opening up with adaptation and with modification meaningful changes to our stay-at-home order, again, because people have taken seriously, overwhelmingly, the stay-at-home orders and physical distancing.
Wow. The first time we've actually had the governor talk about speeding up the school district. I'm not sure exactly, nor have I been able to explore with my colleagues yet exactly what he means or intends when he says start things sooner. But it sounds as though he's saying because there's been so much learning loss, instead of our normal opening date, we should try to get things started a little bit earlier so that we could try to pick up for some of the lost time. What did you make of it?
Well, I think that was a really interesting statement for him to make, but I feel that it's very vague in a lot of ways because all of our school districts have calendars in place for the start of the fall semester. They're different dates throughout a section as large as ours. What the governor is saying, I think, is that in exploring moving some of those dates forward into July, later July, earlier July, I'm not sure, but then also with the caveat of what it would look like. So to bring the students back and then either looking at distancing or smaller classes or staggered times or staggered days, or if there's going to be this wide variety of different deliveries of education, I guess part of me would just say we're all taking our guidance from our health professionals, and I would think the socialization, the ability for school to take on more of a normal environment for students and staff. I'm not sure that opening earlier, but having so many restrictions and different things in place, it's hard to evaluate whether that's going to be successful or not.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm going to begin as soon as we finish today, trying to get a little more information on exactly what what his intentions were with that comment. But either way, it's clear that the governor intends to get things rolling here in California once again, namely the economy, and certainly wants people to be able to go back to work, and certainly wants children to go back to school. He has been adamant about the fact that the learning loss, which we all appreciate, is what's on everyone's mind, because it's certainly a matter of social justice, and that light has really been shining brightly on it, as we have so many children now since closure that have been disconnected from their schools. So there's no doubt that the intentions are good, and I'm anxious to see how this is going to play out. Okay, let's get right into it, Rob, and start talking about what CIF intends for this coming school year. And I know, much like all of us, you're waiting for more information as well. But our coaches, our students provided, student athletes provided our coaches some questions, our ADs as well. So I have a bunch of questions we'd love to get
Great.
answers from. So,
Great.
so let's just get right into it. I have the pictures up on the screen for everyone to see. If schools open with social distancing and congregation guidelines, do you foresee any fall sports being acceptable? Or is it a all or none?
The start of all fall sports is going to be dependent on one thing and one thing only, and that's going to be decisions made by people like you, by our educational leaders, who make the decision based on, again, the health professionals and the guidance that you receive, that it would be safe to reopen your campuses. Once you've made that decision, then the next decision is going to be under what guidelines or provisions are you going to make, and then the decision about whether it's time to then allow the girls volleyball team to go back in the gym, the water polo team to jump back in the pool, the football team to get back on the field, the girls tennis team to get back on the tennis courts, et cetera, et cetera. So, we're an academics organization first and foremost. Our motto is academics, integrity, and athletics. And so it is about academics. And there won't be anything going on with fall sports or any kind of sports throughout the school year until academically our schools are back on track and are able to do that in a way that they believe it is safe to then resume athletic activities. So again, that will be the process that will start academics first. If the schools and school districts and so forth believe it's time to resume the athletic activities, then you will make that decision. And once we get, this is going to be the huge challenge that we will face as a southern section with 563 member schools, how many of our schools need to be back and reinstituting their athletic programs for then us to develop a calendar that would appropriately have fall sports back in, including championships and all the things that we've missed and all the things that we really look forward to getting back.
Well, the way it came across, the governor talked about this being the second phase of a 4-phase system that eventually would lead to the ban being totally lifted and everyone's able to resume normal activities in their lives. The second phase of opening schools and childcare facilities, that incorporates the social distancing guidelines and the congregation guidelines. So it would seem as though, even though we were able to reopen schools with 10, 15 students in a classroom to allow for distancing, to not have too many students there at the same time for the same purpose, it doesn't seem as though you'd be able to conduct sports under those conditions.
I would agree with you. And there might still be some local control when you opened up the gymnasium, let's say, and you were trying to have a volleyball match, and you could control the number of people who come in and where they sit and distancing and so forth. But I wonder, how do you put the students on a bus and send them to another school to play? And how do you deal with a sport like football where the students would be, in contact with each other on virtually every play? And social distancing and other things like that wouldn't really be possible for the student athletes, much less looking at spectators and parents and so forth. So if schools are going to be returning in a social distance format and they're not really going to be fully operational in terms of the interaction between students and staff and and so forth, then I'm really not sure how a sports calendar and a sports model would fit in a social distancing environment.
Yes, it certainly doesn't seem like it's possible. The next question was really about just that, which is what scenario would have to occur to be able to pick up where we left off. It's not only is the state put order from the state, one thing that's governing us, but obviously there's local orders. Here in Riverside, schools are closed till June 19th. And obviously we all cross county boundaries. So do you foresee some schools starting and others not starting and continuing with playing for those who can?
Yes, I do, because already, even without a circumstance like this one, our schools across our section have different start dates. And so we already have that. And again, the enduring challenge that we're going to have is when some schools do believe in their communities and with their health authorities and their school boards and all those in leadership positions who believe it's time to reopen up and to allow athletic programs to resume. How far ahead will one district be over another district? And there may be even within your own county, in Riverside County, as you know, you have different start dates than other school districts within your own county. And that will be local decisions made by the local school districts and local school boards. And that will be something that we have to monitor and keep track and make sure that we can make as good a model for instituting sports again, but only after we know there's enough schools and enough of the schools that have come back and reinstituted programs under what I would consider a normal guideline, where you're allowed to get on a bus, you're allowed to open the gym, you're allowed to have football players practice against each other and then actually go out and play against other teams. I think those things would all have to be decided upon and agreed upon. And then, we have to be honest. The fear in that decision will be the moment that, let's say, we believe it's safe and we get back out there and, a football player tests positive. So now, is that entire football team at the school going to have to quarantine for 14 days? Is the team that they played against on Friday going to have to quarantine for 14 days because they've been exposed to a player from a team that has tested positive? What kind of reaction are we going to have when and if we do open up and allow this interaction to continue? Are those the steps that would have to be taken if someone tests positive with the resumption of sports? And we have to think about that too. So it's a very complex and very fluid situation. So we have to keep looking at a situation where confidence can be restored, that people believe that they will be safe and their health will not be compromised if they are back doing these activities that we are hoping to have return.
Right. I agree. I'm really curious as to whether or not sports would fall under phase 4 or phase 2. Phase 2 being opening schools. It seems to me that not only the congregation of large numbers of fans, particularly for football, but obviously just all the contact that goes on between players during games. It just seems like they're two very, very separate things. So let's continue. This is one of the questions I'm curious about, Rob. Does CIF have a seat at the governor's or state superintendent of schools table, or are you consulted, or someone in CIF consulted?
We are authorized by the state legislature to be the organization, the CIF throughout the state, to be the organization that conducts high school athletic programs. So we do have an authorization from the state legislature to be in the role that we are in. In terms of having a specific seat at the superintendent's or governor's table, I'm not sure that we have that. We are the CIF state office is in Sacramento. I know that there's a lot of dialogue that goes on between the Department of Education and the CIF. We have our executive director is in very constant contact almost with the Department of Education. Our legal counsel is also involved in that. We actually have someone who works on our behalf, the CIF's behalf, in Sacramento with the legislature and so forth. So I think we're consulted. I think we reach out to the California Department of Ed, as we've been doing recently, on certain rules that we have and maybe accommodations that could be implemented to respond to the real life situations and scenarios that are going to present themselves when schools do reopen. So as I said, there isn't necessarily someone sitting in at a governor's education meeting or the superintendent of public schools, but there is an ongoing dialogue with the Department of Education and our organization, and including with legislatures and those folks involved in that.
Yeah, sports, high school sports is just so integrated into our culture. It's so important to all of us. And as a high school principal myself, I absolutely love sports, high school student athletes, and this is just a sad day that we're having discussions about whether or not we're going to be able to let the kids play. It's just an absolute heartbreak, not to mention the students who all missed their spring season, for seniors particularly, just absolute heartbreak. What groups, Rob, such as the CDC, the Public Health Office, et cetera, provide CIF with guidance?
Well, all of them. We certainly are following the stay-at-home orders that apply to where we are located and to the areas around us. And again, just monitoring the different recommendations, the different things that are coming out from our health authorities. It's a constantly changing thing, and we're hearing new projections. We're hearing new options for reopening things. You know, on one hand, the governor is very, very concerned and upset about the weekend in Orange County, specifically when the beaches were crowded and people just seem to not pay attention at all to the guidelines. And then on the other end, you're hearing he wants to explore opening schools earlier than he originally thought. So it's just very difficult to try to balance the messages that are coming on a daily basis, really, sometimes within the same day, to determine what the best course of action is. But, you know, we're not going to be that initial decision maker. We're going to be following the guidance of the health authorities, and then the guidance of, again, people like you and our educational leaders in charge of our school districts and our private schools, who are always going to make the decisions in the best interest of the health and safety of their students and their staffs and their communities. And we'll do that, and we will support them in that effort. And then from there, we can start to look at where we fit in. As you said, we might be a phase or two beyond when schools are reopening. And if that's the role that we are to play, then that's the role that obviously we will play and respect the reasons why. And we just have to be as informed as we can and as on board as we can be with what the real professionals who know this better than any of us. I mean, my father and my grandfather were both physicians, and you know, dedicated their lives to be in a position to help others. And I've always said one thing, as a son and grandson of two wonderful gentlemen who I loved and respected very much, is listen to your doctor. And that's how I feel. And you listen to your doctor,
Yeah.
because, you know, if you don't, then why are they there? So we're going to do that. I know you're going to do that. And we're going to do the best we can to try to bring something back that we know everyone loves and misses terribly. I mean, I've talked about this. Maybe we were taken for granted a little bit. I think maybe education and our professional educators, teachers, they've always been there. People could count on us. We were always going to be doing what we were doing. And now that it's been gone, I think there's hopefully, when it comes back, a real renewed and genuine appreciation for the efforts made by all of us. I include you and your staff and your district personnel to put students first and provide these great educational opportunities for them in the classroom and in the environment that I've always referred to, which is outside the classroom, which is where I believe we fit in the CIF with our educational mission to use that platform of education outside the classroom and teach the life lessons that athletics participation will teach. So it's a real combined effort that we all put in, and I really hope that the future will bring a renewed appreciation and understanding of what a special thing we have, and how much we miss it, and when it comes back, that we really want it to be back stronger than ever.
Oh, well said. I absolutely concur. I do think that for those who may have undervalued education or educators, they definitely will have a new perspective. And I believe of the many silver linings of this crisis, everyone working together, coming together, making decisions in the best interest of our communities, of our state, of our country, is really going to help us in the long run. So thank you for those comments, Rob. Let's
Thank
continue.
you, and I agree with you 100%. And I will also say this real quick about sportsmanship, because I include sportsmanship in that, where I think we really, and I expect and I hope that the emphasis on sportsmanship might be a little bit different when we come back. You know, how important is it when the official makes a bad call, when we've been dealing with life and death situations that have taken the opportunities to be part of high school athletics away from us? And maybe we take a little bit of a different approach in sportsmanship, treating our opponents, treating our officials, treating our spectators, treating everybody involved with a little bit more respect and understanding and compassion, because we've missed it. And we shouldn't be in a position when we come back to have the ugliness that can be part of high school athletics become even more of an issue. If anything, I'm hoping that we really see sportsmanship take over too, and compassion and care for others become much more important, that we can reset our priorities a little bit when we get to resume.
Absolutely. What impact will COVID have on the existing protocols related to providing student athletes with water, for example? It's support from trainers, the spaces where they congregate, locker rooms, facilities, and so on and so forth.
Well, someone had asked me another time about the locker room, and how scary it will be to put all the students back in the locker room together. I said, yeah, but the locker room you're talking about may not be the locker room of the future. They may be in that same facility, but they may be separated out, and they may be in situations where they will keep proper distancing from each other. Our athletic trainers and training rooms, and those are some other great health professionals that we really appreciate, and know that they have the health and safety of student athletes first. So those health professionals, I am sure, will be setting up the appropriate protocols they need to set up to make sure that they're clean and sanitized, and the ability for viruses or things like that to be present would be mitigated. So again, will be an extension of some of the things that you would be doing on your campuses. If the students are going to be congregating on campus, again, some of the exposures to different things that might be in a training room or a locker room are different. So our emphasis on the disinfecting and the cleanliness and the efforts to keep those facilities as pristine as we possibly can certainly help reduce the risks involved for the students and staff that are using those.
Yeah, without a doubt, it'll look different as the governor continues to reiterate in his message. He talked about the 4 phases, and the last phase was about people that have jobs where they're in close proximity to others. For example, going and getting a haircut, getting your nails done. Not that you and I get our nails done, Rob, but those, Manny and Petty folks out there, again, they're in close contact. And that's something that obviously you'd be masked and gloved, but still that's further down the road. So it seems that sports continues to move in my mind into this 4th phase, not the early phases 1 and 2, which is going to start to socialize people, but later on down the road, because of all the elements that you've just talked about, where you can't stay you're within 6 feet of people in the sports world. There's no way to avoid that.
That's right. Well, listen, I will tell you that I am currently living with my wife and our 23 and 21-year-old daughters. And if there is a crisis in our home, It is the fact that they cannot get to the nail salon. They would almost contemplate getting on an airplane to Georgia so that they could fly to a state where they would open up a nail salon and let them get their nails done. So I will tell you that it's a constant issue in our house. The hair issue is not an issue for me. And
No,
so
it's not.
no, I'm just fine without it. But you're absolutely right. And as I said, I don't see us in the role of being there at the very beginning. I see us being part of a transition from the academic, purpose, which is first and foremost. And if it comes to a point where we can only open our schools up for academic purposes and still don't feel comfortable and safe expanding the academic pursuits into the athletic pursuits, well, again, I'm going to respect any educational leader who does that. We're not going to really be able to put athletics back without that confidence restored that it's health and safety first. And it may take a while for that. I certainly hope not, but I'd much rather us be able to do it in a time frame and in an environment where we really feel like we can do it without a tremendous risk involved. And that's why the summer concerns me. And even hearing the governor today, and maybe we will talk about that in a moment or two, but the discussion about summer programs, that discussion a month ago is not the same discussion today. When we first saw schools shutting down and things happening, we're getting a lot of questions on summer programs. Now we're hardly getting any, because people are realizing if we truly want to get fall sports back, then we really have to look long and hard at the summer, because I don't think any of us would trade a 3 or 4 week summer program that actually ramps up cases and the ability for us to then have to shut things down again and take those 3 or 4 weeks or whatever time frame that is to help further protect us and make the fall be even better. I think anyone would make that trade. A summer camp for a week versus the entire season of fall sports. I can't imagine anybody wants to see that. So as I said, as this keeps developing, we're getting less and less questioning about, when summer programs can be resumed. If you ask me on a personal, and this is just me on a personal level, I almost feel like let's just take the summer and realize that that's going to be additional time that we can use to help protect us for the fall. I respect the winter and spring sports enough to say, I'm not so sure you really need a summer program to get ready for winter and spring if we can keep those on schedule. Yes, it impacts our fall, and we'd have to make sure we get enough appropriate time for our fall sports student athletes to be ready to start playing games. But if we had to sacrifice a few weeks of the summer to make that more of a reality, I think we ought to make that trade in a heartbeat.
Yeah, I do believe that it might very well come down to that as well, with districts making some decisions based on their local situation. As you mentioned, you have a large area in the southern section, and there's some areas, some rural areas particularly, that really have not been hit to the same degree other areas have been. So they might be a little more anxious to do things where others may not be. But just staying on that same theme, Rob, given local control, do you envision school boards and superintendents playing a larger role? You've kind of alluded to it a little bit, but why don't you talk a little bit more about what you foresee?
Yes, I absolutely do feel that way. And I have confidence in people like you and the people that I know are running our schools and school districts. But it will be that local control. It will be that decision made by you in the best interest of who you are responsible to. And that's the way it should be. And there shouldn't be anyone coming in to tell a district superintendent or a school board, you must do this. I think you have the ability to run your school district in the manner that you believe is in the best interest of your community, and you understand it better than anybody else. So that is going to be the way this plays out. Our local school board, school district superintendents, private school heads of school are going to be making those decisions in the best interests of their own organizations that they are directly responsible and accountable to. And then it will be our task to look and see and monitor just how many of those schools and districts are ready to resume athletics. And at that time, if they believe that they are, and there are enough of them on board, then we can start exploring how we can get athletics back on a larger scale and get it going for championships and throughout the southern section and really the entire state of California. But again, I have the responsibility for southern section, so we would be doing what was the best interest of our section after our local authorities make the decisions in the best interest of their particular constituents.
Sure. And you could see where, as a parent, your senior potentially may miss the season, may miss an opportunity for a scholarship, much like our students in the spring. You could see a parent almost sacrificing anything to play if they could play, right? And despite the potential threat, just because it's, gosh, a senior year, everything you've worked towards, and a potential, whether it's scholarship or not in the works, just to play and finish things out as you started. So definitely very, very sad for our, particularly our seniors.
No question. And I was a high school baseball coach for 17 years, and before I came here, and I just could not have imagined, after all that we had put together and all we had planned for, and we want to take our shot. That's all. We want to win it all and win the championship. But the point being was we just want our opportunity. And if we don't make it and achieve every goal, well, we had our chance. To have it all just completely taken away from you before you get that, I cannot even imagine how difficult it has been for our student athletes and our coaches and our parents and our communities. It just breaks your heart, because it's a special thing, and those relationships and those memories that and we believe we're in the business of making memories, and those memories that aren't able to be completed. It's definitely heartbreaking, and that's why we're so committed and so dedicated to trying our very best to reinstitute it when it's right. And we'll be planning to do that as long and hard as we can.
So do you foresee a scenario where games are played only if the student athletes are COVID tested?
There could be. It's hard to speculate on that. As we sit here on April 28th, there are thoughts and scenarios and things that we can look at. But what does it look like on May 28th? What did it look like on March 28th? A whole lot happened. Seems like it's been 2 years, but what has happened just within the last month, and then what will happen in the next month? So I think we have to just keep doing what we're doing and monitoring these different situations, and then make the appropriate decisions when the time is right. Right now on April 28th, it's hard to know if we would have games with, again, student athletes and spectators being tested and sitting apart and so forth. But if that's the only way we can deliver high school athletics, we look long and hard at that versus canceling altogether and not doing anything. So again, it almost goes back to when this began. I mean, when leagues and different organizations thought maybe initially, well, we'll just have these contests without spectators. We can still conduct athletics and just control the access of those who come to watch. But we found out very quickly that it isn't just those who come to watch, it's those who are out there participating. Just a quick story. I happened to be in Sacramento at the Sacramento Kings Arena for a game the night that the NBA shut the season down. We were inside the venue and waiting for the game to start. Very curious why only one team was out on the floor. And then, as game time approached, they made the announcement we all had to leave. And the reason that the NBA shut down was obviously the player had been identified this was a Wednesday night. On that Monday, that player was out on the floor. And one of the referees that worked on the Monday game was planned to work Wednesday night. And the reason that they canceled that game was because the referee, who 2 nights before had been exposed to the player from the Utah Jazz who tested positive. So, this is how there was thought of no spectators, but then the reality was it was players, it was a referee, it was people and we found, we had hockey players in the NHL, we had more basketball players, we had other examples of these folks who
Mhm.
tested positive and had nothing to do with the spectators necessarily in terms of direct contact with them. But that's what we found when this thing started. So how do we go back in the fall, put it back together, and realize it's bigger than just who comes to watch? It actually involves students and staff and officials and anyone else who happens to be present. So I think all those factors need to be considered if we're going to make a decision to resume and put in stricter guidelines such as testing or or other measures. But then, as I mentioned a little earlier, so one girls volleyball player tests positive. You know, you've seen how many volleyball matches, Alan. What do they do after every single point?
Yep.
What does the volleyball team
Right.
do?
Yeah.
They all come together in their little group, right?
Yeah.
They all touch hands,
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh,
they go
yeah.
back to
No
their spot,
doubt.
you know, and bless their hearts. It's a
Yep.
tradition of volleyball, and it's bonding and the team and all the rest. The softball players, you ever watch a girls softball game and they all meet in the circle after every out and, you know, do their rituals and go back to their positions. So these are all things that,
Mhm.
you know, are we having to say, no, you can't do that, but you're still across the net from a volleyball player on the other school. And like I said, when you take a football game, now you're really talking about person-to-person contact. What is the sideline going to look like? You know, you get everybody standing together on the sideline at a football game. So are we going to be in a situation where they all must be separated so that they can run back out on the field and go, you know, right contact to contact with other student athletes? It's got to, as I said, confidence has to be restored, and we have to believe that we can do those kinds of things in a healthy and safe way, or I don't know that the COVID-19 precautions are going to be applicable to athletic competition.
Yeah, it seems like there's so many moving parts. Like you said, all the support personnel, referees, everyone who's there. It's just eh, very difficult to control, and you could see where referees may be reluctant to even come and do games.
Correct.
Uh, and so many challenges other than just getting the athletes out on the field. So let's say that a student athlete exhibits COVID symptoms. Um, do you think there'd be some particular protocol? You mentioned a little bit earlier. Do you let obviously you let the other team know it happened? They might very well have to get tested. Seems like there's so many things that could go wrong with that.
Well, I do think that there would be what we hear all the health professionals say, that there would be testing and then contact tracing. And I would assume maybe if they're doing this work with testing that we might have the ability to test on our campuses to be able to send a student athlete to the school, the trainer or the school nurse or someone that might even be able to administer a test to a student. And then you'd have to do the contact tracing to see what has happened up till that point. So maybe that seems like a far-reaching thought that it would be on a campus. Maybe it would never. That's not realistic, but that would be the first step. Is that student exhibiting symptoms would have to be tested, and if they came back positive, to certainly make sure those they have come in contact with are aware of it. But you know, that student's been sitting in. I was a classroom social studies teacher. That student was sitting in my U.S. government class with the 37 students that I had. What happens to the other 36 students if that student tests positive? Are they now going to be quarantined for 2 weeks at least, a minimum? How is that going to interrupt the educational processes? So, as I said, there's going to have to be some strong control mechanisms in place so that people will feel confident that possibility, or if there are some mitigating factors that at some point will take care of this virus. And I don't mean a vaccine, because we all know that's a ways off, but if there's other ways that symptoms are controlled or managed, things like that could help narrow the window, let's say, of a person being symptomatic and being able to spread it. But as we all know, we're getting more and more information about not even being symptomatic and being able to spread it. So there's still those unanswered questions about some of those factors. And I just thought, I think you would have to be removing that child with symptoms to be tested and then quarantined from others until they could determine whether the student was was carrying the virus or not.
Right. And then that brings up the privacy question, because that's a whole nother
Correct.
can of worms. So it's not as though you could disclose that information, and seems again as though there's another layer. Once you peel off one layer, you find another. Has there been discussion about adjusting the sports calendar? This was one of the questions my coaches and players
Yeah.
have come up with.
Yes.
Shortening season so that all sports could still crown a champion. So, for example, would if we were out of the woods by November, would there be a 2-month football season, for example, maybe play over the holidays?
Right. Well, I can share with you that we've had a lot of discussion about this, and I'll give you a couple of ideas of how this could potentially work. So let's just take fall sports, and let's take football. The reason I'm choosing football first is because football has the least amount of flexibility. Girls volleyball, boys water polo, girls tennis, et cetera. Those are sports where you can play multiple contests in 1 week. And there's that allows you some flexibility and some adjusting that you just don't have in a sport like football, where we really wouldn't want to be in a situation where the students would play more than one contest per week. So I would offer you a scenario that, working backward from December 19th, which is the final Saturday before winter break, we've put together a scenario working backward from there, where we would have, for example, a 7-week season. Allow leagues to play their 5 league contests and a couple of games prior to that. Now, we have larger leagues. So if we had an 8-team league out there, then obviously they wouldn't have any preseason games. So there'd be a 7-week season. Now, remember, this would be what I call the last gasp. This would be, if you're trying to fit fall championships in before winter break, let's say, this is how it could potentially play out. We're working backward from December 19, 4 weeks of section playoffs, 7 weeks of contests prior to that. And then, this is not absolute, but just as a ballpark, a 4-week prep time where we have 3 full weeks of practice, and then a 4th week, which is what we call game week, where they're going to play on that Thursday or Friday night. So 4 weeks, 7 weeks, then you play 4-week section championships. If you work back from December 19th, the first day of practice is September 14th. That would be it. Now, if it would still, it's close, but not quite, well, then it's September 21 and you have 6 games. If you go 1 more week at September 28, you have 5 games. And you'd start on September 28. The larger leagues would have a task of figuring out how to send the playoff entries in. The 6-team leagues could still play their 5 league games, and we could conduct full championships. For the other sports in the fall, December 12th, be the week before that. Again, they have a little bit more flexibility. Their league play can be shortened. It doesn't take 5 weeks to play league play in girls volleyball or girls tennis or boys water polo. They could have shorter league seasons. They could have shorter preseason. So they could potentially start even later. They could start into October and have practice. I don't know if a girls volleyball team needs 4 weeks to practice before they play, or a tennis team. They might be able to get themselves into shape to play in a couple of weeks. So the possibilities exist. But if we get to that point, now, if we're in November and these are happening, we have a decision to make on winter sports. Winter sports kick in around the middle of November, right? A couple of weeks before Thanksgiving, 10 days or so. So would winter sports be starting up as well? We're conducting the fall, we've moved it back, and then we start the winter. Or do we say, no, we'll just focus on the fall and we'll push the winter back to January. We can start the winter in January, extend their season a little bit longer. Obviously, have to push the spring back a little bit. Get them started a little bit later, maybe into March, but then obviously finish it all up by the end of school. So there's a scenario where, yes, you could fit all 3 seasons in, provided you finish the fall, let's say, before winter break. But now let's say we can't. And on April 28th, I would prefer to focus on the fact that with the scenario I just provided for you, that would be the last gasp of fall sports in December. No regional or state championships. And the CIAP executive director has been very clear that the state office respects the section championships and will allow the sections additional time to conduct section championships, and then leave it there and not have an additional 2 weeks or so of state. So that December 19th date I'm using does not include any regional or state. That would just be section. But let's say we weren't able to do that. So then do we have a discussion about starting fall sports in January? And they go through January, February, and into March. And then winter sports start in the middle of February and go February, March into April, and then do the spring sports start, middle to the end of April and go April, May, and into June, to make sure we could fit all 3 seasons in. The one thing I don't see, and in the discussions I've had with others to this point, I don't see if we can't finish the fall, and let's say we even couldn't start the winter, that we come back in January and we go with football, boys water polo, girls tennis, girls volleyball, cross country for boys and girls, and then include boys and girls basketball, boys and girls soccer, girls and boys wrestling, and girls water polo all at the same time in January. I don't think a school campus could handle that. I don't think it would be good for the students academically. It would be a nightmare for any multiple sports students. So I honestly don't see that scenario where we would somehow push it back. If we had to go to January or February even to somehow start the fall up at that late a time, then we could potentially look at that. I don't think we're looking at it in April right now. We could potentially look at it to try to fit it all into a 5 or 6 month window. But then I'd also say, stats and numbers wouldn't be great if we had students playing 10, 11, 12 football games, January, February, March, and then, a few months later going right back out to a football situation. I'm not sure that's going to be good for them either. So there's a lot to consider, but I think the desire for our coaches and our students and all of us would be to make sure we could get fall, winter, and spring. And we're willing to work through any and all scenarios to try to make that happen. But there will be always coming a time where a decision would have to be made one way or another. And hopefully it would be a decision made that there is a way to get it done. Unfortunately, this last spring, there just wasn't. That window just kept getting smaller and smaller where we had to make that decision. And on April 3rd, there just wasn't going to be enough time. And more than that, it was the schools closing. I mean, that to me was the game changer. When the schools all started shutting down, to me, that was very clear signal that there wasn't going to be an opportunity to keep athletics moving forward without schools. So I know that was a long answer, and I apologize for that, but that's really how we see this playing out.
I think that's exactly what everyone wanted to hear. I think that's what I've been getting is, will we still be able to salvage something? Will we still try to allow our student athletes to play? The governor's comments about moving things forward to increase the potential for students to get more learning time. Again, I'm anxious to find out exactly what that looks like, because it would seem as though a later start, perhaps post-Labor Day, would give more opportunity for student athletes, knowing that the school year could be more traditional and start after Labor Day and go until the end of June, and then you have a much better chance to be able to get all the sports in.
Yeah, you're right. But if the governor and schools begin to open back up earlier, as he suggested, as possible, then that gives us more time. I see that 2 ways. It gives us more time to see if we can do that and still keep the health and safety paramount and making sure that we're not seeing a huge spike or more risks for everyone. That gives us more to base going forward and then beginning with athletics. But if that time becomes more problematic with increases and spikes and more health threats, then that will just push everything further to coming back. So, I do see it kind of both ways, but I guess I would want you to know, Alan, and honestly, the commitment that our staff and I have to deliver, and that's what this is. This is a call to leadership, and it's a call for us that have this opportunity in those positions to answer that call and to deliver what people would hope that we can deliver with what we can control. So I would tell you that our commitment is as strong as it can be, that we can get to some kind of an athletics program back. And if that means pushing it back or keeping to adjust the size of seasons and so that there can be meaningful competition and something that we can give back to our students who miss it so much, then we're dedicated to doing it. And we will until we just get to the point where it's out of our control. And that's what happened to us in the spring. We kept it open as long as we could keep it open and looked at some viable way until it just got out of hand for us. There was no way that we could control it. When every school basically said we're shut down till the end of the school year, there was no avenue available. And so that's where again, for those factors that we are in charge of, then I guarantee you we'll give you everything we have. And until the time comes, if we can't control it and it's out of our hands.
So do you foresee a scenario where there aren't any fans for particularly sports that you can socially distance? I guess you could say in certain sports, depending upon the number of people who are there, you may have a better shot at distancing. But let's say students were tested, so student athletes we knew did not carry COVID, and then you were able to socially distance. It seems as though you'd still be able to conduct quite a few sports, but a sport like football, for example, it would seem as though you wouldn't be able to conduct it only because you have large crowds in most high schools.
That's right. And, girls tennis, could you set up a scenario to play a girls tennis match? You probably could. You could make sure the players don't interact when they switch sides, make sure that the spectators are spaced out and distanced enough. I still wonder, though, if you put the girls on a bus and send them somewhere, they're going to be with their own teammates. They're going to certainly not be social distancing, but that to me would already be handled on campus. I mean, if they're in classrooms, then I would assume if it's safe enough for them to be in a classroom together, you could put them on a bus together. So yeah, girls golf, heck, golf courses are opening up again. So could we have a girls golf match? Probably could, and observe appropriate social distancing and things like that. So you're right. But then you compare that to even a cross country race where there's a lot of students bunched together, or certainly a football game. And it's funny when you talk to the aquatics people, because they keep telling me that, chlorine kills everything. So you can put them in a pool and the virus can't live in the pool because of all the chlorine and the chemicals inside the pool.
Sure.
But I don't know, I'm not an expert on something like that. But no, you absolutely are right about a scenario that could exist in that way. And I just think people are so just involved in hoping this can come back that I think they're going to be willing to accept whatever can be done and within reason. And if that means, again, stricter protocols, it means some sports may start before others. I just think that people are so starved for this to come back that they'll be willing maybe at first to say, well, I don't know about that. But as it gets closer and the alternative is nothing, I think there's going to be more flexibility with people saying, we'll accept it because the alternative is we get nothing.
So you do foresee perhaps some sports being able to move forward while others not.
They might. And
Yeah.
I don't know why we wouldn't try to do something we could for as many as we could do it for. And you're right. There would be some sports that lend themselves to being able to. But see, again, I'll take the cross country model. That's a big deal. I mean, you'll have tons of people involved when you have a league finals, but they can go later. I mean, if we use December 12 as our section championships, you need a week before that to do prelims. You need a week before that to do league finals. And you could condense the league instead of a dual meet with every school going against each other at a dual meet. You could have some kind of a league cluster meet where everybody comes together and does something. I mean, you could theoretically, with students especially, and as crazy as it sounds, but students doing some training on their own. You can run on your own without having to be distanced with a bunch of other people on a daily basis. And somehow, that cross country season for section championships and league finals and all the rest, that might not need to start till November 15th. So again, that's an additional 6 weeks. Actually, that football model I gave you, that's 2 months. But if football started, I don't know why cross country couldn't have started. So, if it comes to something like that, there's still that ability to use the time, that hopefully the time is helping us get better and better control, better and better testing, better and better idea who has the virus, who doesn't. Then maybe some of that stuff can still start even later, but get done and give those student athletes and everyone involved an experience that's meaningful and is respectful of the health and safety of everybody involved. So I just think all options are on the table. And as I said, our job is to be there in support of those options and to do everything we can do to deliver whatever we can deliver to bring it back.
Well, I know I and everyone else who's listening is so happy to hear the commitment, Rob, on the part of CIF, just to make it right for our students. The more time we're able to buy, the more flexibility we have, the better we become at learning how to put those protocols in place. And eventually we will be able to get the upper hand on this. You mentioned the track meet. There was some talk earlier before, right around the time school closed, that there was going to be a track meet in July. There was going to be some final in July. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And
There's been, yeah, it would not be a CIF event. And one of the things that was set up exactly when we had to cancel spring sports on April 3rd was that we would immediately go into what we call summertime rules. And summertime rules mean that the athletics programs are under the jurisdiction and authority of the high school principal. So if what we were hoping was the potential for the schools to try to play a game or to use your school uniforms, use your school equipment, believe it or not, play on Sunday if it works out better for everybody to play on a Sunday. But you could do all those things and try to give the students at least that one opportunity for senior day or the things that people talked about a lot.
Mhm.
And that's easier under summertime rules. You don't have the usual CIF rules. And that's what we were hoping would be of benefit to anyone if that was ever going to be possible, because then you could do this kind of stuff. And that would include any kind of this championship or track championship that I've heard about. That would just be done under summertime rules. The students could represent their schools as long as their school allowed them to do it, and they could compete and they could have that opportunity representing their school, which during the school year is not possible under our rules. But during the summer, as long as the high school principal allows you to do it, then you can do it. So we were trying to remove as many barriers as we could to any competition that was going to happen after April 3rd, if it was going to be allowed to happen. Then schools would basically have as much freedom as they wanted. They could play who they wanted. They wanted to put a tournament together, they could do that. They don't need to get the tournament sanctioned like they do during the regular season. Like I said, they could play on a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. All of that could have taken place if there was the ability to do it. And we were thinking that was the best way to support our schools after April 3rd, because typically those summertime rules wouldn't be in effect until early June, when the section championships and state championships are complete. But as far as we wanted to make it available, April 3rd became the ability for summertime rules to take place. But unfortunately, with the shutdown of our schools and so forth, obviously that hasn't been possible.
Right. Let's stay with the rules, Rob. Is there going to be a COVID response blue book with relaxed eligibility rules and enrollment standards given COVID-related transfers and all of the movement that could very well occur?
The short answer is yes. The specifics I can't really explain yet because they haven't been decided, but they are being discussed. The reason for the discussion is obvious, and I'm very pleased that we're having it. In fact, we're having another conference call tomorrow with the 10 CIF commissioners, myself included, and our CIF state office folks. And we're continuing to discuss financial issues and transfer issues and things that will, when we're back in business, that will be very important for us to be able to address. The thing that we want to be is responsive to the real scenarios and real situations that we are faced with. And I think we can do that. The timing on that, I think the most important thing that we need to do and consider in these discussions is, when do we get the full range and depth and scope of this crisis? It's at a certain point that it is now. But at what point do we get a sense of just how much, how many, how deep this crisis went before it finally started to turn in the other direction? That will give us a much better idea of how to address the scenarios that are going to present themselves. So I do think that there's some options on the table. I do think that the discussion is going to continue. We've been working, as I told you earlier, we've already been working with the California Department of Education on some education code issues to make sure that any kind of issues and rules are not going to be in violation of the ed code, or if there are going to be ed code provisions made that may address this as well. So there's definitely going to be discussion continuing. And once we get a real sense of how deep this has gone, then, and not to say that we don't realize it's gone deep already, but we're still not there yet. We're still not where we believe it's going to be all completed, so to speak, in terms of this particular time frame, and when things start to reopen, and when there's an ability to know better of where we are as a society, so that we can make sure that we can be responsive to real life needs and real life scenarios. And I want the CIF to be proud of that. I want us to be seen as helpful and responsive, not as people who have their head in the sand and not really realizing and recognizing how much suffering and how much difficulty that our students and their families have had to endure.
Indeed. And we have no idea the depth of that. You're absolutely correct. So many families are affected by this. This has certainly crossed socioeconomic boundaries as well. I could foresee a situation in which a family might no longer be able to afford private school, for example, or may be forced to live with relatives and no longer live in the same attendance area. You could see where that would just add insult to injury for a young person who already has had their senior year, for example, or a season upended.
I think there are also public school scenarios that will present themselves. We'll have students that have gone to different schools, maybe outside of their local attendance area for various programs or various reasons, maybe because their parents work there and can transport them. But if the parent doesn't have that job anymore, then they're not able, and they're not going to want to be transporting their student away from home somewhere else. So, I do think, and you as a public school district, I'm sure will be seeing that scenario you described, where families that have sent their students to private schools may not be able to continue to do that. But I also think you might see some public school impact as well with students that may change from their previous public school too, due to job loss, due to transportation loss, due to many other factors that may have resulted in them needing to transfer to a different public school too. So like I said, there's a lot of different ways this can manifest itself. And our responsibility is to be able to, again, deliver, to come through, to be a source of support and help to people that need it.
Absolutely. With some districts using credit, no credit, pass, fail for spring grades, and some districts like we in Alvord are using traditional letter grade systems still, and then there's even hybrid versions. How do you untangle all of that when it comes to scholastic eligibility, and how are you going to define it and apply it moving forward?
The interesting challenge now, and it's going to be a local school challenge. Schools have always determined and certified their students for academic eligibility. Now that schools, many of them changing to different pass fail or credit no credit types of systems, they're going to have to adapt those changes to the CIF bylaws, which state a minimum of 2.0 grade point average and passing a minimum of 20 credits from the most recent regular grading period. So the districts, the schools are going to have to determine what a pass means. Is that a C? Is there an equivalent that we can assign to that pass grade so that we can apply what that equivalent is to the 2.0 grade point average bylaw? Also, the same thing with credit. Are we going to be able to determine how many credits a student is going to receive so that they can meet the standard of minimum 20 credits from the recent regular grading period? But coupled with that, our ongoing discussions that again are part of our work with the other commissioners in the state office. Our schools are allowed to have a probationary period, and schools can determine the length of the probationary period. It just cannot be longer than one semester. So a school or school district, if they wish to implement a probationary period that is longer than the one they currently have, as long as it doesn't go past one semester, or they may, if they haven't adopted a probationary period before, may consider adopting one and instituting it by the fall of 2020. There's a couple of things that local schools can do to try to mitigate students who don't achieve. I think one of the things that we all know is the distance learning option is difficult. It hasn't been available to every single student. It hasn't been something that's been easy for anyone, for our students, for our staff, for anybody. And the last thing that we want to do is harm these students even more. They're suffering enough, and they're missing enough. So for us to be in a situation where we find so many more students who, when we finally are able to resume, become academically ineligible, then we're failing them. And so that continues in terms of discussions on various ways that either at the local level, or if we need to go deeper into the CIF bylaws and constitution, again, working with Ed Code and some others, the education department, then I think that's on the table for discussion, so that when we do come back, I think the last thing we want to see is students dealing with more difficulties than they've already had to deal with.
Without a doubt. And looking through the lens of students is always the best way to make decisions in our business, Rob. CIF mentioned, as I referred a little earlier to, that all-comers track meet in July, and that was even going to include seniors. So this is one of the issues we've been discussing regarding graduation. We will not be able to congregate students in time for a proper graduation for our seniors, which we all feel absolutely terrible about. Then the possibility of a summer graduation at some point, which we all would love to provide for our students, knowing there's challenges, including the fact that the seniors are not even yours anymore, right? They've moved on, they've graduated. But with this track meet or other situations that you suggested would be summer rules,
Yes.
do you think that's something that schools could take it upon themselves to begin safely doing in virtually all sports?
One thing about summer is everybody usually has some kind of summer program. So you, unlike the regular school year, you actually would be bringing almost all of the school's programs onto campus at various times. If they were playing games, if they were working out in the weight room, if they were practicing. So like I said, the potential for even more than would be normal is during the summer. But the issue of the seniors, and that's why the summertime rules, as I said, if typically summer programs are for the next school year. They don't include graduating seniors. But if there was that desire during the summer and it was deemed safe and healthy to do so, then the baseball team and the softball team get together and use and include the graduating seniors, and they put on the uniforms and they play at the school campus, and they have that opportunity to put some closure on a season that wasn't allowed to continue and had to be stopped. So this track meet could be very well conducted in the same format. The graduating seniors to be included, again, wearing school uniforms, being able to compete, representing their school. It would be a nice way to give them something, but only if it's deemed safe to do so. And that was, I said, that was our hope, that we as the CIF would be able to support those activities and not be a barrier to those activities, not make it impossible and or increasingly difficult for those to happen, basically making it about as easy as possible to make it happen, and try to support everybody, to give these students one more opportunity.
Okay, yeah, I agree. And I think we're all inspired, or encouraged, I should say, with the governor's comments about getting schools started again and reopening and figuring out ways to make it work for our students. Let's conclude, Rob, with kind of a bigger picture. From little league to the big league, sports are out of business, basically. We've all been out of business and we all miss it, those of us who really do live and die with sports. What do you see in the immediate future of sports in our country? And of course, then we've talked plenty about locally at the high school level, but do you see that, like you mentioned a little earlier, about perhaps sportsmanship would be improved, or there'd be a little better perspective on the part of some? talk a little bit about that. Talk about, because, crises, I wrote this last week in one of my messages. Crises shape history. And there's no doubt that this crisis will shape history. And I think it's going to shape education for the better. We've already learned how to do things differently. Things we long have held sacred, we now are having to abandon for other things. Where do you see that as it relates to high school sports and just sports in general in a sports crazy country like America?
This is an opportunity for us to reset our priorities. And that's where I really do see a positive effect from this. And I did kind of allude to it again, so I won't go through and repeat it all. But I do see that as the a benefit from this, that we can reset our priorities and really figure out where we fit in as educators. And again, using the high school athletic experience as a classroom. And I include youth leagues, and I don't necessarily include professional sports. I don't believe that their mission is to do that kind of education. I believe that it is in youth leagues, and I believe it's in our high school environment for sure. But I think that it is a new priority for us, and I think people hopefully will recognize the value of what is being done, and when it comes back, keep that in mind. I mean, the last thing I want to see is 2 weeks after we get back together, everyone's forgotten everything that's gone on and how much we missed it and how much we wished it was here when it wasn't. And everybody expects it to be as it was. I hope that we take just a moment to think about what's important and then approach it in a different way. I got a history degree. I was a social studies teacher. I loved history. And I take this approach, and it's from Winston Churchill at a terrible crisis that could ever happen to him as a leader of a nation. But he always talked about it being their finest hour. And I feel that way about us. I mean, this can be our finest hour. This can be the biggest challenge we've ever faced, a life and death challenge. But yet to overcome it and restore what is important and what is meaningful and valuable can be our finest hour. And I want to approach it that way and keep that commitment to seeing that vision become reality. So there are better days ahead, and I look forward to enjoying them with people like you when the time comes, and we're going to enjoy them. But when we do, I'm hoping that we are doing it with, again, a more heightened awareness and an understanding of how special education-based athletics are and important that they are, and that we never want to see them go away again.
Well said, Rob, and you are the right man for the job, and a big job that it is, heading up the southern section of the CIF. Thank you for the wisdom. Thank you for the candidness. You always get candidness with Rob Wigod. Full disclosure, Rob and I go back a long way. I started my career in Long Beach Unified teaching at Millikan High School. Rob was a student probably back then at Wilson, but we had ties in Orange County together as well.
That's right.
And my last few stops as a superintendent. So Rob, great respect for you and your work. Keep up the good work, and we'll get you back on the show in a few weeks, month or so, and get caught up with what's happening with the CIF, because this is changing, and who knows what it's going to look like in 3 weeks or a month.
Right, and I think you, Alan, you're right. We have a lot of years together, and I have great respect for you and hold you in high regard. You're the right person to be leading young people and the staff
in the school district, and they're fortunate to have you, and happy to help you any way I can, and we'll stay in touch, and just look forward to, as I said, better days ahead. So anytime you want to discuss what's going on, I'm happy to help, and I'll look forward to that too.
Perfect. Well, we'll see you soon. And I am going to conclude the podcast with that. We usually do our mailroom segment, but we've definitely spent a lot of time talking with Rob, and certainly could probably talk for another couple hours. So signing off on this week's podcast. Again, thanks to our guest, Mr. Rob Wigod, the commissioner of the CIF Southern Section. Good night, and we'll see you next week.